Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Game Develop Repeat. I'm Chris, and today we are talking about Final Fantasy VII, the old one, not the remake. Let's get into it. Some of my earliest video gaming memories are around Final Fantasy VII. Before we even jump into talking about the game, I'm going to explain to you how we played this as children and also some of the massive mistakes that we made really early on in the game, because it's relatable, it's a little bit funny. It's some of it is not relatable. Some of it you may hear and go, wow, that's deranged. How could anybody enjoy the game like that? First thing we did that I remember, me and my siblings played this game together, and we would share one save file. I don't know why we were doing this, but we were like, after school, one of us would be playing and the others would be watching, usually. And what we ended up doing was sometimes one of us would play and save, and then another one of us would pick up the game, and we would be at a different place than we were before. And we would just keep playing, which this is a giant JRPG and it doesn't have like a quest log system or whatever. We were just kind of jumping in off of whatever our sibling was doing and just being like, yeah, okay, I guess I'll figure it out. That is a bizarre choice. I don't know if we were like maybe we were just like grinding things or not progressing the story. My memory's not that clear on the details, but I do every once in a while think back on the fact that we were doing that, and I find it very funny. Additionally, we named every character something completely bizarre and like jokey, which is fine. But we were going off of like a Game Facts guide. Do you remember Game Facts? We were going off of a Game Facts guide, which was like we printed out this massive strategy guide off of this website. Um, it was a pretty good guide, by the way. Like some of those old guides are fantastic. But we printed this thing out. We were following it, and they were like, bring this, go talk to this character, whatever. I'm like, which character is that? And like our character names are like one character, I think Barrett was just a bunch of like asterisks and like ampersands and stuff because he was always cussing, and that's how they depicted it. And we were like, that's his name now. And then like we called Sid like Old McGroin or something. We just had all these weird names for the characters. So we're like sitting there being like, wait, is that Profanity Guy, or is that Old McGroin, or is that like Spiky? Which I don't know what the heck we named Cloud, but we gave them all these names and we just could not remember who was who. Yeah, so lots of fun playing that game as a child. Let's talk about the details of Final Fantasy VII. Again, the original, not the more recent remake, which unfortunately I have yet to play, but I do intend to play it at some point. So the original Final Fantasy VII has a lot going for it. It has such an interesting world. The aesthetic of this world is cool. It seems to be drawing from some old mythology with some of the like naming conventions of the like city of Midgar, um, and the what is it? The wait, did they name the giant snake the what is it? Midgar Salam or whatever in that, or is it a different thing? Anyway, they've got this cool connection to, is that, I think that's Norse mythology. Feel free to correct me. And they've got an incredible sort of dark aesthetic, which I don't think is always pulled off as well as it was in this game. There's like a technological, depressing world that also ties in fantasy elements. And that is a huge victory to me. The way that they managed to mesh these things together and create moments in this world that feel very light and carefree, and intertwine them with moments where you feel like the Shinra Corporation, the big bad corporation, is like slowly destroying the world, and like there's just so much interesting like technological enmeshment with everything going on in this like dark, polluted, uh dystopian thing, like aesthetic, but it doesn't feel so overwhelmingly negative that it's like crushing. Like the you don't get the impression that this world is nothing but darkness. Which makes it feel very real. You feel like it's a much more real world because there's good and bad, there's give and take. I think often we're playing a game and they're so committed to one aesthetic that the world stops feeling real. They're so committed to giving you the impression that everything is bad that they forget to give you a little bit of good, to give you a little bit of hope, to let you pet a dog, right? I think the games that do story really well give you both of these things. I think the games that really pull you in and make you feel for the characters uh make the characters feel like real people in a real world. And if you go too far in the cheerful or the dark, you don't feel like things are real anymore. Good example, if anybody's been watching the Last of Us series, I'm not going to spoil anything. I have not played the game, but I have watched the series and I know a lot of the stuff from the game. But a good example is that series because there's a lot of human connection. And even though the the show is extremely dark and the game is extremely dark in terms of concept, there are a lot of bright spots of just people interacting with each other. And that's beautiful. And that's what makes everything so real. If every interaction between all the people was extremely negative, then it would feel like, okay, but this is a little over the top, right? Like at some point somebody would try to break the tension, or and not in like the Marvel way of just like a one-liner, but like just some level of like, let's get a little stress relief here. It's a necessity for characters to connect in that way, I think. Anyway, I'm getting a little sidetracked from what I wanted to talk about, although I think that stuff is extremely important in this game. I think it may be one of the biggest factors that makes this game successful, along with the soundtrack. I'm not going to dig deep on the soundtrack. I just love it, and we'll just leave it there. Everybody talks about it. It's amazing. I love it. Let's talk gameplay. Final Fantasy VII introduces the materia system, which is cool. And at the time that I first experienced it, was a mind blower. The materia system, just as a brief overview, you get spells and abilities in little stones, we'll say, little pieces of materia, which are sort of, there's a whole lore thing behind it, but let's just focus on the gameplay element of it. Although the lore does make it even cooler, the gameplay element of the materia system is you socket these stones into your equipment and they give you powers, they give you abilities, and then they level up. The materia becomes more powerful, not you. Um, this is cool. This is a great idea. I think it took a long time for other games to implement similar things, although you could argue that like gems being socketed into gear in Diablo 2 is like a related thing. I don't remember. I think Diablo 2 came out after Final Fantasy 7. It must have, right? Based on like technology being used, it absolutely must have. Um, but yeah, the socketing of things into items is huge, but then using skills with that, like letting the sockets themselves, like letting the socketed gems themselves level up and become more powerful, and then you can transfer them from character to character. That's so flexible. I love it. It's so cool. It's so interesting. There's a lot going on there that I absolutely love, and I'm glad that other games eventually grabbed onto this idea and started using it. Path of Exile, a game that I spent a shocking amount of time playing, I'm very into that genre. Diablo 2 started it, and I just never stopped. Uh, Path of Exile uses a similar idea. It also has your skills socketed into items, and they level up through being equipped while you kill things, right? Basically the same concept, but just a different execution, and a really cool one, because also you can like trade the stones to other people. Like, great stuff in Path of Exile. Now back to Final Fantasy VII. Um, this materia system adds a lot to the game, and then you end up seeking out certain like rare pieces of materia. You end up going, oh, I need another one of these, and you have to like find it. Or you go, oh, I need this summons. Oh man, I could go on about summons. uh yeah, but there are certain materia that have summons, and we haven't even touched this part. The materia affects your character's statistics. So if you equip this really powerful summon, it might have a drawback. It might make you weaker. There's so much cool stuff going on there. It's amazing. They make everything into a little double-edged sword. So like, it leads you in a certain direction in terms of designing your own character's skills. It's beautiful. I love it. It's great. I'm really interested to see how it was implemented in the remake, because I haven't played the remake, and I intentionally kind of avoid spoilers. So at least some of honestly, I've seen a lot of spoilers story-wise for that game, but the gameplay, I actually don't really know how it works. So I'm interested to see how the gameplay works in that game at some point when I get around to it, which is going to be a minute, because I got some cool little indie games that I want to try that are coming out soon. And also, I'm just kind of waiting to see how the 7 remake shakes out. Like, I'm waiting to see what happens with the second and potentially third parts of that remake before I start buying in, which could be a long wait. But anyway, back to the original. So we've talked about the world building, we've talked about the materia situation. I think there was one other point that I wanted to touch. Oh, yeah. Mini games and chocobos. Yeah, that's the topic. Mini games and chocobos. The mini games are cool. I love how they're used for other reasons, right? You take your mini game and you go, oh, this is like the follow-up from a boss fight. There's this boss fight where afterwards you're like running away and there's like a motorcycle chase thing. And then they take that element and they go, oh, let's make that a mini game too. Why not? I assume the boss fight thing came first and then they threw it in a mini game. But it feels um very it seems like a good idea to take things from your game and reuse them in a way where it's just, oh, did you enjoy this section that's unlike the rest of the entire game? Did you want more of this thing that only happens once? Here you go. Here's a mini game. That seems wise to me, giving your players that option. And I really appreciate that they did that and used it to build out the Golden Saucer, which is a beautiful theme park of of both joy and depression when you play the game. There's a lot of great stuff about the Golden Saucer, but there are also some points in there where you're like, man, stuff goes down. And this place exists off of like the backs of these people, and like it's compelling. It's great world building. But the mini games there, beautiful. Chocobos and chocobo racing. I am obsessed with this element of the game, despite the fact that objectively it's probably not actually that fun, but I really am a big fan. In fact, I tried the Final Fantasy MMO 14 partially because I knew, oh, now I want to play it again. I gotta not do that. Partially because I found out that it has some element of chocobo, like chocobo breeding, chocobo raising, chocobo training, any of that stuff, and partially because I found out that it has fishing, which I have an obsession with. Okay, so this chocobo breeding system in 7 is, in all honesty, probably not that compelling, but it's very like fleshed out and you can put a lot of work into it to get a golden chocobo to access this one little island that's like inaccessible in any other way to get a specific materia that you can't really otherwise get. And I think that materia is the Knights of the Round. I could be incorrect, but I believe that's the one that you get there. And the golden chocobo, okay, let me just go off about chocobos for a second. Chocobos have different colors. Each chocobo color has different abilities. Regular normal chocobo is just, hey, it's a chocobo, right? That's the deal. And then you can get to through a whole bunch of different chocobos. Some can go across rivers and like shallow water. I think some can go across. Is there one that can go across oceans specifically? I might mix things up with other games here, by the way. I think there's like a dark blue that can go in the ocean. There's like a lighter blue that can just go through shallow water. I think there might be, I think red can go over mountains or something. And golden can travel across anything. So the real issue is you got to be able to travel all the way across the ocean and then over this steep mountain. And I think it can access a place that even your airship can't get because there's no landing zone. And then this is one of the beautiful parts of this game. Once you unlock this kind of movement, you can explore anywhere on the map. You can just go. And it's great. It's got a truly open feeling world. It's not nodes. It's not little points that you go to. There's not like a ton of interesting stuff everywhere you go, but you can. And there are secrets tucked away. So there's a benefit to just exploring. They really executed that well. Uh, and I appreciate that. And I also think there's still like some childhood nostalgia and some wonder over experiencing that for the first time, right? Beautiful game, cool stuff. Love the chocobos. Big fan of the chocobos. Big fan of that overworld like map style. Actually, I think that is a gameplay feature that I like a lot. That I think maybe doesn't get used as much because it's like old school and like kind of low tech ish. But I think the most recent Final Fantasy games kind of like put you into, you're in 3D mode, you're able to explore every detail of the game. So it's a little harder to transition into just this overworld map thing because you're like exploring every detail. You don't really need an overworld map. But I think you lose something there. I think there's something about the overworld map that lets you go, I don't need to explore every detail. I just want to go from here to here. I see the whole world. If I want to go into any of these places along the way and explore them, I totally can. But I just want to travel here. There's something about that. It kind of makes it feel like there are these vast, unexplored expanses of the world. It makes it feel like you're able to move pretty quickly. There's something there. And I haven't quite pinned it down, but I do think there is a value in less detail in an open world exploration, and not that you don't populate the open world with tons and tons of stuff, but just that you have regions of the world that you explore and then regions of the world that you kind of zoom through. I think there's value there, and it's hard to know exactly what that is. I'm going to have to think about those ideas a bit more. Let's transition over to the development portion of this episode. All right, I have two questions for myself relating to Final Fantasy VII, and the first one I think is probably the most important. What are the most actionable lessons from Final Fantasy VII for a solo developer or small team? It's easy to look at a game like this and go, oh, there's so many things they do that are brilliant and amazing, and then get overwhelmed with ideas and have unactionable ideas. You can look at the world and be like, wow, there's so much I could do. And then you go, oh, wait, that is 10 years of my life by the time I release that. Who knows what technology is going to be done? And also, good Lord, 10 years. So what are the most actionable lessons for a solo or small team? I think the number one lesson is actually from the mini games, which is reusing things from within your own game to flesh out the content of the game. And in an interesting way, right? You can't just slap down the same thing over and over and over in different places, but you can do different combinations of things. You can take the same thing and give it a new mechanic that is relatively straightforward to program without having to create new art assets or new sound assets or whatever. Like if you can reuse something and lock the scope of that reuse down to just some code changes, if you can heavily limit the asset cost of reusing something in a more interesting way, then you can get a lot out of that, right? And I mean, obviously with the golden saucer, there is to some extent, like, there are assets that they had to make in order to integrate that stuff into a different area. But let's say you just make a little menu that says mini games, and then it just pushes you to the code for a section of the game that's just been slightly modified. And then you just kind of like make a game in itself of, oh, this is just going to loop. It's going to get slightly faster every time and whatever. Like, you don't have to do intense balance changes. You don't have to push really hard to make it amazing because it's a mini game. It's an extra. It's a side thing. And it's just something that the player will appreciate the existence of. I think that's a huge idea that you can pull from this game. Obviously, you got to figure it out within the context of whatever you're developing, and how important is that mini game to the rest of the game? How much effort do you end up putting in? So on and so forth. But I think that that's the biggest takeaway. I think the other actionable lesson is about story and character growth and development. If you have something story driven, if you have something with a lot of character growth, if you have something where the world building is really important, I think for me, and this is, I guess, a personal choice, for me, the lesson to take away is don't make one feeling overwhelming. The whole, like, an entire book cannot just be sad. A book's overall vibe can be sad, but the whole book can't just be sad thing after sad thing after sad thing after sad thing. There have to be happy moments, right? If the vibe of your game is cheerful, every moment can't be cheerful. There have to be downs for there to be ups. I think that is actionable because story-wise, it's just a different way to write the story, to structure everything, and so on. If you can do that, you're going to make a much more enjoyable game just by having a bit more of a polished script or world building or story structure or what have you, without having to put in hundreds of hours making more content. Okay, next question that I have, and then we'll talk about my own game development just a little bit. Next question is, what can we learn from the materia system? I think the overarching lesson from the materia system is take a simple idea and make it interesting, or take an older idea and innovate a little bit. They took the idea of skills and they said, is there a way to, this is a hypothetical conversation, I don't know what they actually said, but they go, hey, is there a way to take these skills and make them transferable across characters? And then somebody goes, oh, that's interesting. Or maybe they looked at something with like socketing or something. Like, they took skills and they encapsulated them and handed them to different characters. That's interesting. They took an old thing, skills, and then they just added a new feature to it, encapsulation, and made it transferable. I think there's a lot of concept there. There's a lot of potential concepts that could come out of that process. You could take this concept and put it into like a platformer. Actually, Monster Sanctuary, which I have not yet played, but has caught my interest, kind of does that. It has like Pokemon creatures that have abilities, and it uses those abilities for platforming stuff. So like, you'll have a guy that has like fly or whatever, and you can use that to like glide from platform to platform. I think that's the general impression I got. I shouldn't talk about that one too much. I have not played it, although it looks amazing. Worth looking into for sure. All right. My progress. In my game development. Real quick, what I'm working on, I'm making a platformer about a ball of soot jumping around and and fighting little enemies. And conceptually in my head, he's trying to get out of like a fireplace or a chimney. I don't know if that's actually going to end up integrated into the game, into the experience, but conceptually he's trying to get out of a chimney. He's a little ball of soot navigating around all this stuff. That's the game I'm working on. First game that I'm making, other than like a couple tiny learning projects that don't have any menus or anything, whatever. So with that context, what I've been working on this week, the biggest thing that stands out in my mind is the audio controls and the pause menu. I was figuring out how to pause the game, show a menu, interact with that menu, and then make a sub menu for audio and how to enter that, exit it without any bugs happening, and all of this stuff. And I made 2 sliders, one to control music, one to control sound effects. I only have 1 sound effect in the game right now, but based on my testing with that sound effect, the sliders will work. That was an interesting process figuring out. I had to figure out the Unity player input system. I had to get to know that a lot better than I already knew it. It's not as complicated as I thought. I thought I ran into a big bug for like 2 hours, and then it turned out that I just forgot to change the color on one of my buttons, and so I couldn't tell that it was highlighted, and I thought that it wasn't highlighting, but it was. Specifically, let me give you this tip in case you're playing with this menu and you're like as inattentive as I am. There's a difference between highlighted and selected in Unity, and they're not the same thing. And if you're thinking that your keyboard controls aren't working and you've only changed highlighted color, you need to also take a little look at selected color, because highlighted is when my mouse, for my use case, highlighted was when my mouse was over it. Selected was when it was selected with my keyboard. So I had to do some adjustment there. That's the main thing I did. The other super important thing I did was I locked in my scope. I have I have like these gigantic post-its, right? I have a gigantic post-it on my wall that has 2 lists. It has core features and optional or nice features. And then I have those 2 lists. Under them, I just have like a big line and like writing to myself to keep me from adding anything beneath those features, and like scribbles and stuff so I don't have space to write. And that is that is now my scope. I've locked it in. I'm not going any further. That's the deal. That has helped focus me, because and just getting this stuff on paper is so important to me. But that is helping to focus me. And it took some of the clutter out of my brain to write it down, and now I can look at it. I'm not thinking about it 24/7. When I need to think about it, I know it's on that paper. I'm not worried about forgetting it. It's there. So that was huge. I strongly recommend, once you get to a certain point in your project, once you know what it is, I guess, and what do I know? I haven't published a game yet, but once you really know what your project is, locking in that scope feels, at this point, that feels like it was a huge step for me, and it feels like it was very important, and maybe something I should have done earlier, but I think we're all right so far. I think I didn't know what this game was for a long time. It being my first project and all, it's kind of expected. All right, we're pretty much wrapping up here. We'll transition to a little bit of like a sustainability tip, repeatable behavior thing, and then we will close it out. This week's tip is to explore types of art and creativity that you have not yet explored, or that you used to do but don't do anymore because you feel you don't have time for it, or whatever you got there. Especially, and this is a big one in my mind, if there's a category of creativity that you want to explore but feel you are not capable of, absolutely explore that activity for a couple reasons. One is you will learn more fundamental things if you manage to break through that wall. Like, you'll get more perspective and interesting stuff from that. In my opinion, Yeah, that's been my experience. And then two, you might think you're not capable of it because you have a high standard for it, and then when you start doing it, you might quickly find that you end up reaching your own standard if you just do it consistently or getting closer to your standard very quickly, and then you go, "Oh wait, maybe I am capable of this." And that confidence or that knowledge of your ability to grow will just compound. It will affect all of your other creative pursuits in really cool ways. So I'm a big fan of exploring other types of art other than the ones that you are engaged in, especially if you're a creative person, if you're deep into this whole creativity rabbit hole making stuff. Like, it's good to have multiple projects. It's good to be able to step away from one and go look at another because man, if you get stuck on one creative project and can't make any progress in it, and it's really, really important to you, that can be honest, not to be dramatic about it, but that can be like a crippling experience. That can be extremely frustrating and painful to not be able to make progress on the thing you care the most about. If you're able to just pivot to something else that you care a lot about or that you just enjoy doing, then it's fine. You can just take a break and then let your brain work in the background. You're not focused on the other thing consciously. And when you come back around to it, you'll probably have new ideas. Okay, that's everything for this week. I hope you all have a fantastic week and have fun making some cool stuff. Get out there and create. I will see you next time. Goodbye.